Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. President Trump announces an abrupt change in policy in the Middle East. With no warning, the president declared that the United States will withdraw its troops from Syria, the policy announced on Twitter. The president declaring that, quote, "We have defeated ISIS in Syria, my only reason for being there during the Trump presidency." Well, the United States has roughly 2,000 troops in the country, and this is not the first time that the president has said he wants to pull those troops out. Back in April, President Trump said he wanted to bring American troops back home. The Pentagon, however, appeared caught off guard by today's news, but quickly recovered, issuing this statement several hours later. The coalition has liberated the ISIS-held territory, but the campaign against ISIS is not over. We've started the process of returning U.S. troops home from Syria as we transition to the next phase of the campaign. Now, the statement went on to promise to continue working with American allies to defeat ISIS wherever it operates. Well, interestingly, Israel's prime minister did not seem surprised by this, saying that President Trump indicated to him earlier in the week that such a move was in the making.
They made clear that they have other ways to have influence in the area. This is, of course, an American decision. We will study the timeline, how it will be done, and, of course, the implications for us. In any case, we will make sure to maintain Israel's security and protect ourselves from the arena.
Reaction from the president's own party, however, was very mixed.
For the first time in my lifetime, we have a president with the courage to declare victory and bring the troops home.
If this decision is a withdrawal of all of our forces in Syria, now we're dramatically less safe. This is an Obama-like move.
All right, joining me now to take a closer look at the U.S.'s decision here and its possible implications is Quanta Ahmed, a Middle East analyst, and Matthew Brodsky, senior fellow with the Security Studies Group. Thank you both for being with us. Matthew, I want to start with you. This decision clearly has widespread implications, so let's try and break this down. Firstly, the president says that the mission to defeat ISIS has been successful, hence the troop withdrawal. Now, granted, ISIS has been significantly neutered in Syria. But, Matthew, does this withdrawal now negate those gains made against ISIS?
Absolutely. First, ISIS is not defeated specifically in Syria and Iraq. Of course, ISIS is now a global problem and exists in several locations. But in Syria, we've still been waging battles against them as recently as yesterday and today, perhaps even. Some 200 or so strikes that U.S. and coalition forces were engaged in just last week with ISIS targets in Syria alone, not including Iraq. But again, our goal, as we've been describing it for well over a year when it comes to ISIS, is its enduring defeat. And it's the addition of the word enduring, which means that it must be a sustainable defeat. So it's not just we polish them off in a certain territory, it's that we make sure that they can't come back. That hasn't been accomplished by a mile.
And the president's agenda in the Middle East seemed to be to contain ISIS as well as to counter Iran. Kanta, many are saying that this move contradicts that policy goal. How does this impact the situation in Iran?
Well, you can guarantee tonight in Tehran, Damascus, Ankara, Moscow, there's a celebration. First of all, removing the U.S. presence. Remember, these troops were not on the front line, but they were providing extremely sophisticated support to the Syrian Democratic Forces, just as they worked very closely with the Peshmerga and still do inside Iraq. This was a deterrent. Now there is a land bridge for Iran from Tehran directly to arm Hezbollah. We've seen recently in the last 2 weeks what Hezbollah has been doing with the $800 million Iran invests in Hezbollah every year. Second, this is a calamity to any American ally around the world. This tells us that there is no value placed in those local forces who combat Islamism with the United States because they're discarded. Today, the same day, Turkey's just purchased 80 Patriot guidance enhanced missiles, $3.5 billion from the United States. The U.S. is leaving, so Turkey gets the green light to now decimate Kurdish forces in Syria that it's declared as terrorists after they've helped us contain ISIS. And then for the Kurds in Iraqi Kurdistan, they've already been facing a fragile southern border with Iranian ambitions inside Iraq, seeking to and succeeding to take away Kirkuk. Now the western border is even more unstable. I rarely criticize the president overtly, but this is not a good decision, as his UN ambassador, National Security Advisor, John Bolton will be thinking, as General Mattis will be thinking, and as many of the forces on the ground will be thinking.
Matthew, to Conta's point, this is not a good decision by the president. That seems to be the general consensus. Turkey, Iran, Russia, all celebrating this move. Let's focus on the Turkey angle, because there was a recent phone call between President Trump and President Erdogan. Erdogan threatening to take action in Syria against those Kurds that the U.S. troops have been supporting. Is there a connection, perhaps, between that phone call with Erdogan and this decision?
Yeah, I think it's directly connected, which is interesting in and of itself. If you just pause and step back to think that what Russia, what Iran, what the Assad regime have been unable to accomplish, which is the withdrawal of U.S. troops, our supposed NATO ally, Turkey, who of course does not really act like an ally, was able to do it in a phone call with President Trump. Now, Turkey has been threatening to invade parts of Syria for a very long time. Of course, they've engaged in threatening action as well. They have not played a helpful role for us right now. This dates back a while. But while we don't know exactly what the deal that was made between President Trump and President Erdogan on their phone conversation, we know that it's beyond whatever this has to do with Patriot missiles that the U.S. will sell them. That's supposed to be apparently a substitute for S-400 missile systems, kind of a hostage taking by Turkey, which was to, again, play with Russia at the expense of NATO. So we don't really know exactly what Trump is offered, but apparently our ally threatened to invade, and we decided to turn our tail and flee. The amount of leverage that we are sacrificing over this is amazing, especially given the fact that it's only been since around March or so that we've had a very good Syria team in place that has been working to get us out of the hole that the Trump administration inherited from Obama. And here we are today, having built up so much leverage, and to just toss it aside for what no one that I know in Washington can actually point to and say, well, this is the accomplishment. It's really baffling.
Conta, is there any kind of thinking that makes this decision seem like a good idea in the 30 seconds we have left?
You see, I tried hard to do this. I understand that soldiers are serving overseas. It's Christmas. We want them back with our families. These soldiers were not in the front line, though they are in one of the world's most perilous regions. But no, and my concern is that there are many critics of the president who will just say that he's using this for political expediency. I'm very worried about the vulnerability of Israel and Saudi Arabia, both facing crises right now, and the ongoing empowerment not only of Iran, but Turkey, which has shored incredible political capital just since October, since Khashoggi's killing. So this is really terrible timing and not a good decision in the United States' interest.
No, Prime Minister Netanyahu did say that he was aware of this, but Israel clearly not very happy with the move. Kant and Matthew, stick around. We want to talk to you after the break about Netanyahu also calling out Hezbollah at the United Nations, saying that those tunnels are an act of war. We'll get into that when we come back. You're watching Clear Cut Plus, coming to you live from New York City. I'm Michelle McCory. Thanks for watching, and we are back with my panel, Kanta Ahmed and Matthew Brodsky, discussing the president's withdrawal of troops from Syria, the implications for Israel, and Israel also dealing with the Hezbollah problem. Kanta, Prime Minister Netanyahu speaking to the UN, saying that those terror tunnels constitute an act of war. Israel calling on the UN Security Council to act to stop Hezbollah. Israel essentially saying, if you don't stop Hezbollah, we'll have to, because between the tunnels and those missiles, Israel can't afford not to. Can Israel expect the UN to actually do something?
I think Israel has to use its experience of the United Nations, which views the state of Israel completely distinctly to any other nation, and that meets my definition of anti-Semitism. Israel cannot rely on the United Nations. The United Nations had the audacity to suggest Israel was violating certain aspects of the agreement over the Blue Line. It is clear those tunnels, 80 feet deep, 2 meters by 2 meters, are there to allow the ingress of high numbers of ground troops, fully armed, to do a ground invasion into Israeli territory. And now we know with the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Syria, with the Lebanonization of Syria that's going on openly in the Russian puppeted, controlled Syria that remains after this calamitous war, we know that all bets are off. And Iran has invested in regional conflict for decades. So Prime Minister Netanyahu is speaking for all Israelis. Israel will have to come to its own security and its own defense, and the United Nations is not going to be supportive on the Israeli side. I don't know what more we need. We've already had an enormous war of Hezbollah in Israel, which lasted 53 days, and that was before this kind of disruption in the region.
Matthew, to Kanta's point, Israel probably can't rely on the United Nations for this. The United Nations failing to condemn Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. So can Israel afford to not take action? Does this mean we are about to have an Israel-Lebanon war?
That depends on the calculation that Israel is going to make right now. What they've done is that there have been rules of engagement that have existed for a long time. They're unwritten rules between Israel and Hezbollah. And they shifted in 2013, where Israel could then strike at incoming weapons transfers throughout Syria. And they've done this some 200 times, they've claimed, to prevent weapons from Iran getting to Hezbollah in Lebanon. But the theater had to remain in Syria, and for the most part, Lebanon remained out of the fray. By switching now the missile production sites, which Iran has done, into Lebanon, it's trying to find a way around those rules of the game. And really, it's the missile production facilities that are actually a bigger threat to Israel than the tunnels are, as bad of a problem as the tunnels themselves are. Israel has been tracking those for 4 years. So the calculation Israel has to make is, if it attacks in Lebanon, what kind of response would it receive from Hezbollah? Would Iran, for instance, sacrifice its greatest achievement, which is Hezbollah? Would it sacrifice Hezbollah? Would it sacrifice all of Lebanon and its own regional standing before it had a nuclear deterrent in order to come back and create a huge war? Or if there weren't a lot of collateral damage from an Israeli strike, would it be somewhat quiet? Israel's going to have to think this through, but clearly they're going to have to act on their own.
Kanta, to Matthew's point, we have those Iranian-funded missile factories in Lebanon embedded in the civilian population. Those people essentially used as human shields.
Yes,
what do you expect Israel to do?
Michelle, excellent point that my fellow panelists just made. Iran has not just expanded its missile-producing operations in Lebanon, it's doing it openly in Iraq, reactivating factories that Saddam used and building warheads there that are also trained on Tel Aviv. So I think Iran's intentions are extremely clear. And I'm not a battle commander. I can't say when the time comes to launch a war. But are we getting closer? Yes. And my argument, which will be published in the Jerusalem Post on Friday, is that U.S. sanctions on Iran have to be ratcheted up and have to encompass Iraq minus Kurdistan, because Iraq has become a playground and an annex to Iran for military purposes, with a prime target being Israel. So the stakes are extremely high.
They are indeed, and this troop withdrawal from Syria just makes the matter even more complicated and more confusing as to what the Trump administration's agenda is with its intention to curtail Iran. Kanta Ahmed, thank you so much. Matthew Brodsky, great to have you with us on the show. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.
All right, well, shifting our